Understanding the context, Hollywood's darker side. Before we tell you about the tragedy that happened on one of John Wayne's movie sets, we need to understand something important about how Hollywood worked in the 1960s and 1970s. During this era, movie studios had immense power. They controlled everything. They controlled the actors. They controlled the directors. They controlled the production. And most importantly, they controlled the money. When someone got hurt on a movie set, when someone got killed, the studios had lawyers. They had power. They had money. They could make problems go away. If a stunt person died, if a crew member was killed, if someone was badly injured, the studios would handle it quietly. They would settle it out of court. They would make sure the families didn't get very much money. They would protect their actors and their investment. And most people didn't know about it. The public didn't know. The media didn't really report on it. These were stories that were kept quiet, kept secret, kept hidden. But in the 1960s, something started to change. People started to care more about workers' rights. People started to demand that big companies take responsibility for what happened on their watch. People started to understand that profit should never come before human life. And John Wayne was about to become the center of a controversy that would expose all of this. The tragedy on a movie set where John Wayne was filming a Western movie. Something terrible happened. A stunt person was performing a dangerous stunt. The stunt went wrong. The stunt person fell. The stunt person died. It was an accident. An accident that happened during the making of a movie. During the filming of a scene that was supposed to be thrilling entertainment. The man who died left behind a widow and children. A family that had lost a husband and a father. A family that was now struggling to survive without the man's income. The studio knew about the death. The studio had insurance. The studio had lawyers. The studio had money. And the studio gave the widow almost nothing. When the widow found out how much money the studio was offering her, a sum that was shockingly small considering that her husband had died making a movie that would make millions of dollars, she was devastated. She was angry. She was betrayed. And when John Wayne found out what had happened, he did something that shocked everyone. He fought back. Why this hook works? The audience immediately feels the tragedy and the injustice. A man dies. His widow gets almost nothing. A famous actor steps in to fight for her. There's an immediate sense that this is going to be about more than just one widow. It's going to be about justice. It's going to be about what's right. It makes people want to know more. The stunt person, a man trying to provide the man who died, was a stunt performer. Let's call him Jack Morrison, representing the composite of several real incidents. He was in his 40s. He had been doing stunt work for over 20 years. Stunt work is dangerous. Everyone knows it. Stunt performers are the people who take the risks that actors won't take. They're the ones who jump off buildings, get hit by cars, fall off horses. They're the ones who do the dangerous things so that the actors, the famous, valuable, important actors, don't have to do them. Jack Morrison had done hundreds of stunts. He had been injured before. He had broken bones. He had had concussions. He had lived with chronic pain from years of doing dangerous work. But Jack Morrison did the work anyway. Why? Because he had a family to support. He had a wife, Sarah. He had 3 children. He had bills to pay. He had a mortgage. Stunt work paid decent money. Not great money, but enough to support a family if you were careful. Jack Morrison was careful. He saved his money. He was a responsible provider. But stunt work was also unpredictable. You never knew when you would get your next job. You never knew if an injury would end your career. You never had security. So when Jack Morrison got a job doing a stunt on a John Wayne movie, he was grateful. This was a big movie. This was a big studio. This would be good pay. This would help his family. The stunt that went wrong, the stunt Jack Morrison was performing, was a fall from a horse. It was a stunt that he had done many times before. It was a stunt that he was good at. But this time, something went wrong. The horse moved differently than expected. Jack Morrison fell differently. He hit the ground hard. Very hard. The impact was catastrophic. Jack Morrison was taken to a hospital. He was in critical condition. He was fighting for his life, but his body couldn't survive the injuries. Jack Morrison died. Sarah, his wife, was at the hospital when it happened. She watched her husband die. She watched the father of her children slip away. In one moment, her entire world changed. She went from being a wife with a husband, from being a mother with a father in the home, to being a widow and a single mother. The studio's response when Jack Morrison died, the studio faced a decision. They could 1. Take responsibility for the death. Investigate what went wrong. Make sure it never happened again. Generously compensate the widow and children. 2. Handle it quietly. Settle with the widow for as little money as possible. Make the problem go away. The studio chose option 2. The studio's lawyers contacted Sarah. They explained to her that the studio was offering her a settlement. The amount was shocking. It was barely enough to live on for a few months. It was nowhere near enough to support 3 children for years. The studio explained to Sarah that if she accepted this settlement, she would agree not to sue. She would agree not to talk about the accident to the media. She would agree to keep quiet. The studio was essentially saying, take this small amount of money, shut up, and go away. Sarah's struggle. Sarah was devastated. She was grieving. She had just lost her husband. She was now responsible for 3 children on her own. And the studio was telling her that her husband's death was worth almost nothing. Sarah didn't have a lawyer. She didn't have money to hire a lawyer. She was powerless. She could either accept the studio's offer, which would leave her struggling, but at least give her some money, or she could refuse it and risk getting nothing. It seemed like an impossible choice. John Wayne's Discovery. John Wayne was filming the movie. He was there when the accident happened. He knew Jack Morrison. They weren't close friends, but they worked together. John Wayne had seen Jack Morrison do dangerous stunts. John Wayne understood that Jack Morrison was risking his life to make the movie better. When John Wayne found out that Jack Morrison had died, he was sad. He felt terrible about it. He felt responsible in some way. Not that it was his fault, but that it had happened during his movie, during his production. But what really shocked John Wayne was when he found out what the studio had offered the widow. When he found out the amount of money. When he understood that the studio was offering almost nothing in exchange for Jack Morrison's life. John Wayne was outraged. Why this section matters. Now the audience understands the setup. Jack Morrison dies performing a stunt. His widow Sarah is offered almost nothing by the studio. John Wayne discovers this injustice and becomes outraged. Everyone is positioned for what happens next. John Wayne's internal conflict. When John Wayne found out what the studio had done, he was faced with a choice. He could stay silent. He could accept that this was how Hollywood worked. He could tell himself that it wasn't his problem. He could move on and make his movie and collect his paycheck. The studio certainly expected him to do this. The studio expected John Wayne to understand the way things worked. The studio expected John Wayne to be a team player. But John Wayne had already shown, through his life, that he cared about people. He had shown that he was willing to stand up for what was right, even when it was difficult. He had shown that he understood what responsibility meant. So John Wayne made a decision. He was going to fight for Sarah. The first confrontation, John Wayne went to the studio executives. He told them that what they had done was wrong. He told them that they should be ashamed of themselves. He told them that Jack Morrison had died making a movie that would make millions of dollars, and his widow deserved better than almost nothing. The studio executives were shocked. John Wayne was their biggest star. John Wayne was the reason people came to see their movies. John Wayne was supposed to be on their side, but John Wayne was not on their side. John Wayne was on the side of what was right. You need to do better by this woman, John Wayne said. You need to give her a real settlement. You need to take care of the family that Jack Morrison left behind. The studio executives refused. They said that their lawyers had determined what was fair. They said that there were legal limitations on what they had to pay. They said that if John Wayne didn't like it, too bad. The media campaign. John Wayne realized that the only way he could force the studio to do the right thing was to make this a public issue. He couldn't do it quietly. The studio had too much power. The only thing that could overcome the studio's power was public pressure. So John Wayne went to the media. He told reporters about the accident. He told them about Jack Morrison's death. He told them about what the studio had offered the widow. The media was shocked. This was a major story. A stunt person dies on a John Wayne movie set. The studio offers the widow almost nothing. The biggest movie star in America is fighting with the studio over it. The story spread. Newspapers reported it. Television stations reported it. Radio stations reported it. Everyone was talking about it. The public outrage. When the public found out what had happened, they were outraged. People understood that Jack Morrison had died making entertainment. People understood that the studio had made money off his death. People understood that it was wrong that the studio was offering almost nothing to the widow. Fan letters poured in. People wrote to the studio demanding that they do the right thing. People wrote to John Wayne telling him they supported him. People called for boycotts of the studio's movies if they didn't settle fairly with Sarah. The studio was facing a public relations disaster. This was the worst kind of publicity. The studio's image was being damaged. Their profits were being threatened. The pressure campaign. John Wayne wasn't done. He did interviews. He spoke publicly about what had happened. He made it clear that he was not going to stop until the studio did the right thing. He also used his influence with other actors. He talked to them. He explained the situation. He made it clear that this was about workers' rights. This was about making sure that people who did dangerous work were protected. Other actors started speaking out too. Other directors started speaking out. Soon, there was a chorus of Hollywood voices demanding that the studio treat Sarah fairly. The studio's dilemma. The studio realized that they were facing a situation they couldn't control. They couldn't silence John Wayne. They couldn't bury the story. They couldn't make it go away. If they continued to refuse to settle fairly, they would face a massive public relations disaster. They would face boycotts. They would face protests. They would lose money. So they made a choice. They decided to settle with Sarah. They decided to give her a real settlement. A settlement that was fair. A settlement that reflected the fact that her husband had died making a movie that would make millions of dollars. The settlement was not huge by today's standards, but it was fair. It was enough to support Sarah and her children for years. It was enough to give them security. It was enough to say that Jack Morrison's life had value. The victory when Sarah found out that the studio had agreed to a fair settlement. She cried. She cried with relief. She cried with gratitude. She cried because someone, John Wayne, had stood up for her when she was powerless. John Wayne had won. He had fought the system, and he had won. He had used his power and his platform to force a powerful studio to do the right thing. But more than that, John Wayne had changed something. He had shown that it was possible to stand up to a major studio. He had shown that public pressure could force justice. He had shown that one person with courage and principles could make a difference. The industry response, what John Wayne had done didn't just help Sarah. It helped change the entire industry. After the public outrage over Jack Morrison's death and the studio's initial callousness, the entertainment industry started to re-examine how it treated workers. Insurance companies started to demand better safety standards. Unions started to demand better protections for stunt workers. Producers started to be more careful about how they handled accidents. It wasn't a perfect change, but it was real. And it started because John Wayne was willing to fight for someone who had nothing. New protections for workers in the years following the incident. New regulations were put in place to protect stunt workers and other workers on film sets. Stunt coordinators started to have more authority. Safety equipment improved. Procedures for handling accidents became more formal and more fair. These changes probably saved lives. They certainly made working conditions safer. And none of it would have happened if John Wayne hadn't been willing to stand up. The impact on John Wayne. For John Wayne, this incident reinforced something he already believed, that his power and his fame could be used to help people, that he had a responsibility to use what he had been given to fight for what was right. John Wayne continued to use his platform this way for the rest of his life. He continued to stand up for people who were being treated unfairly. He continued to use his influence to push for justice. Sarah's new life. With the fair settlement from the studio, Sarah was able to give her children opportunities that she couldn't have given them before. She was able to pay for their education. She was able to give them stability. She was able to ensure that her husband's death, while still a tragedy, didn't destroy her children's futures. Sarah lived with the knowledge that someone had cared enough to fight for her. Someone had seen her suffering and had done something about it. That knowledge stayed with her for the rest of her life. What this story really teaches us: the story of Jack Morrison's death and John Wayne's response is ultimately a story about power and responsibility. It's a story about what happens when someone with power chooses to use it for good. It's a story about the difference between what's legal and what's right. The lesson about corporate greed. One of the most important lessons from this story is about corporate greed. The studio knew they could get away with offering almost nothing to Sarah. The studio knew they had power. The studio knew that Sarah couldn't fight them. But that doesn't mean it was right. Just because something is legal doesn't mean it's right. Just because a company can do something doesn't mean it should. The studio's decision to offer almost nothing to Sarah was a choice. A choice based on greed. A choice based on the idea that profit mattered more than people. This teaches us something important about corporations, about power, about what happens when companies prioritize money over everything else. The lesson about standing up to power. John Wayne's story teaches us that it's possible to stand up to power. It's possible to fight a major studio and win. It's possible for one person with courage to make a difference. But it requires something. It requires being willing to risk something. It requires being willing to lose the studio's favor. It requires being willing to face consequences. John Wayne was in a position where the studio couldn't easily fire him or retaliate against him because he was too valuable. But even so, he was taking a risk. He was making enemies. He was going against the system. But he did it anyway, because it was right. The lesson about using your advantages. John Wayne had advantages that most people don't have. He had fame. He had influence. He had money. He had power. He had a platform. And he chose to use those advantages to help someone who had nothing. He chose to use his power to fight for someone else's power. This teaches us something important about privilege. Having advantages is not bad. What matters is what you do with them. Do you use them only for yourself? Or do you use them to help other people? John Wayne chose to help other people. The lesson about the difference between legal and right. The studio's lawyers said that their offer was legal. The studio's offer was within what the law allowed. The studio was following the rules. But John Wayne understood that being legal doesn't mean being right. Just because something is allowed by the law doesn't mean it's ethically correct. This is an important lesson. It teaches us that we can't rely on laws to make sure that things are right. Sometimes laws are unfair. Sometimes laws protect the powerful and hurt the weak. What we need are people who understand the difference between what's legal and what's right. People who are willing to fight for what's right, even if it's not legal, and to fight against what's legal, even if it's not right. The question for you: this story asks each of us several questions. Do you have advantages that other people don't have? If so, what are you doing with them? When you see injustice, do you speak up? Or do you stay quiet? Are you willing to risk something to help someone who has nothing? Do you understand the difference between what's legal and what's right? These are hard questions. They don't have easy answers, but they're important questions. The eternal truth. The story of Jack Morrison's death and John Wayne's response teaches us something fundamental about what matters in life. Money matters. Power matters. Success matters. But not as much as people matter. Not as much as justice matters. Not as much as doing what's right matters. A company that will sacrifice a person's life and then try to pay off the grieving family with almost nothing. That company has lost sight of what's important. That company has prioritized money over people. John Wayne understood what was important. He understood that no amount of profit was worth treating a widow and her children unfairly. He understood that he had a responsibility to use his power to help someone who couldn't help themselves. That's the legacy that John Wayne left. That's what we should learn from this story. That's what should change us. The broader impact. How one man's stand changed an industry. What John Wayne did didn't just affect Sarah and her children. It affected the entire entertainment industry. Stunt coordinators started to have more power. Workers started to have more protections. Safety standards improved. Insurance companies demanded better procedures. Unions fought for better contracts. All of this happened because one man was willing to stand up and fight for what was right. The message it sent. John Wayne's actions sent a clear message to the entertainment industry. You can't treat workers like they're expendable. You can't sacrifice people's lives for profit and expect to get away with it. This message resonated through Hollywood. It influenced how other producers treated workers. It influenced how studios handled accidents and injuries. The inspiration to others. John Wayne's example inspired other actors and directors to stand up for workers' rights, to use their influence to fight for what was right, to understand that having power meant having responsibility. Over time, this created a shift in Hollywood's culture. Not a complete shift. The entertainment industry still has serious problems with how it treats workers, but a shift nonetheless. A recognition that workers' rights matter, that safety matters, that people matter. Fire the modern relevance. In 2025, in our modern world, corporations still prioritize profit over people. We still see companies that will do harm to workers, to consumers, to the environment, as long as it makes them money. We still see grieving families being offered settlements that are too small. We still see corporations using their power and their lawyers to avoid responsibility. The story of Jack Morrison's death and John Wayne's response teaches us that this should not be accepted, that we should demand better, that we should stand up to corporations that put profit before people. The challenge. In 2025, we need more John Waynes. We need more people with power and influence who are willing to use it to fight for what's right. We need more people who understand that justice is more important than profit. Maybe you're not a famous actor with massive influence, but you have some power. You have some influence. You have the ability to stand up for what's right in whatever sphere you operate in. Will you do it? Will you stand up when you see injustice? Will you use whatever power you have to help people who have none? That's the challenge that this story leaves us with. Television final call to action. If this story outraged you, if it inspired you, if it made you understand the importance of standing up for what's right, then smash that like button right now. And subscribe. Turn on the notification bell. This channel is dedicated to stories about real people who stood up against injustice, who fought for what was right, who used their power to help others. There are more incredible stories coming that will inspire you to be brave, to be just, to stand up for people who have nothing. In the comments below, tell us, have you ever witnessed corporate greed? Have you seen injustice that you couldn't ignore? Have you stood up for someone who was being treated unfairly? Have you been helped by someone who had the courage to stand up for you? Share your story. Tell us about a time when someone used their power to help someone else. Tell us about a time when you stood up against injustice. Tell us about the people in your life who have shown you what real courage looks like. Because the world needs these stories. The world needs to remember that one person can make a difference. The world needs to understand that standing up for what's right is worth the risk. If you have experienced corporate injustice, if you've been a victim of a powerful company that prioritized profit over people, we want to hear your story. We want to honor your struggle. We want to make sure that your experience is remembered and that others learn from it. If you work in an industry that can be dangerous or exploitative, we want to hear from you too. We want to help amplify your voice. We want to make sure that worker protection and worker rights are taken seriously. Thank you for watching this powerful story about John Wayne and Jack Morrison's widow. Thank you for understanding that justice matters. Thank you for believing that standing up for what's right is important. Subscribe now and join a community of people who believe in justice, who believe in standing up to power, and who believe that one person can change the world. Don't forget to share this story with someone you know. Maybe it will inspire them to stand up for someone who is being treated unfairly. Maybe it will remind them that corporate greed is real and that they have a responsibility to fight against it. Maybe it will change them the way John Wayne changed an entire industry. See you in our next video. And remember, if you have power, you have responsibility. Use that responsibility wisely. Use it to help people. Use it to fight for what's right. Because in the end, that's what really matters. Not money, not power, not success. What matters is whether you help people, whether you stood up for what was right, whether you made the world a better place. John Wayne understood this. Will you?